the myth of heartthrob. However, underneath the chaos, the characters, and the costumes was a soul gradually disintegrating. Scandals, courtrooms, betrayals in public, broken addiction, grief, and love stories. Thus, a great loss. However, in some way he's still in this place. He was not as he once been, but in a manner that perhaps, just possibly, is even stronger. This is not a resurgence, there's more to it. Because at 62 no new role is being revealed by Johnny Depp. Possibly a different performance. He's exposing himself behind Jack Sparrow, the guy behind the hands of Edward Scissor, behind the heartbreak headlines and lawsuits, and what he's showing us now could be what, although we always had suspicions, we never dared to say it aloud. Prior to Johnny Depp becoming among the most identifiable faces on here was just a peaceful, wide-eyed youngster, Earth, traversing a universe that never created room for kindness. Born on the June 9, 1963, he grew up in Owensboro, Kentucky, were brimming with warmth instead of continuous movement for 20 movements before he became 18. Every new town seemed to be a failed stability pledge. However, what it wasn't the newer suitcases that stung the most. Educational institutions. It was what took place within the house, the location of a kid meant to feel secure. Rather there, screaming matches, banged doors, and the sort of quiet that cried out more powerful than words. His parent-seed relationship was a battleground. Additionally, by when they got divorced, Johnny did not provide relief at the age of 15, it seemed like, collapsing. Later on, he would explain it as a volcanic eruption rather than a breakup trauma, and it was true. It made his basis, disrupted his perception of what love was intended to resemble, and abandoned him emotionally destitute. Betty, his mother Sue. After, Sue remarried Robert Palmer. Despite the fact that his stepfather turned out to be a peaceful source, the damage was already done. The mental devastation didn't just vanish. Nobody inquired about his well-being. Nobody provided him with the means to comprehend out how he felt. Thus, he did what many when the suffering becomes too loud, kids do. He fell silent, and within that quiet something was shattering. 12 years old, they gave Johnny Depp a guitar. Not from a producer, but as a rock star, a birthday present. Easy, almost forgettable. However, it wasn't. It turned become the first event that didn't happen in his life wounded him. It didn't shout. It failed to strike. It stayed. In the corner, it waited out of his chamber until he was prepared. Additionally, when with the sound in his head, he took it up. Began to make sense not verbally, but with audio. He wasn't picking up knowledge. Chords. He was getting used to breathing once more. His escape was music, his treatment, his voice when he was unable to locate one. In the smoke from cigarettes, garage band and malfunctioning amplifiers, Johnny wasn't aiming for stardom throughout practices. Peace was what he sought. Every strum of that it felt like a confession to play strings. Every one a wound wrapped in rhythm is poetic, and even this fresh lifeline. However, was it sufficient to relieve him of the pain that every day school was brought? Miramar Johnny was high and drifting like a ghost, back in between classes, misinterpreted, undone, uninterested. The world didn't know how to deal with a boy who felt too much, and he finally gave up trying in order to suit it. He left at the age of 16. One fleeting attempt to return was unsuccessful with permission, but with punishment. The principal gave Johnny a worried look, wondering, and said a statement that altered his life indefinitely. Go ahead and live. So it did. Johnny Depp did not enter Hollywood with either stars or a script in hand in his gaze. He arrived in pursuit of something really different. Music in a band, a dilapidated van, and a meager income. He moved from Florida to Los Angeles for rent, Angeles hoping to become a rock star. However, the city was unconcerned. The gig stopped. Coming in, the ringing of the phone ceased, the gleam off causing it to become a dull pain off. Surviving the band, one by one participants gave up, the dream disintegrated, and Johnny was by himself, taking strange occupations, gazing at smudged ceilings, pondering whether he had erred. It was the quiet that doesn't seem to calm. It seems like a failure, shouting into your ear. He had not made any plans for this, parents for this. The instrument that used to reminded him of what he was unable to become. He was stranded. No funds, no strategy, and worst of all, no name. However, such as the greatest tales are those in which everything appears to be lost. And fate has a humorous method of unexpectedly turning up. Her name was Allison Laurie Ann. Allison Laurie Ann wasn't only the first wife of Johnny Depp, she was the first person he truly believed in. Although the world witnessed a broken, unsuccessful musician, another thing she saw was a silent fire that had not yet been set ablaze. That additionally, she introduced him to a person who would transform everything. Cage Nicholas, a rock star, was never seen by Cage without a stage. He perceived a raw, unadulterated presence, vitality. Try acting, Johnny, he said. Depp didn't believe it. He had never taken a class, never committed a monologue to memory, hadn't desire attention, he didn't even think he merited it. However, Cage's confidence was infectious. It broke something that's accessible. The audition followed. Elm Street Nightmare wasn't glamorous. It was never intended to be done very seriously. However, after Johnny was cast, it seemed as though life had given him a mirror. Hewitt intended to be present. However, in some way he fit in. He used to be a boy, playing depressing music in dimly lit spaces. The afterward he was dragged into a bed by Kruger Freddy. It seemed unreal. It was absurd. It was destiny. First acting seems to be an anomaly. However, he soon discovered that might not be all. Similar to music, it was a different language, an additional method to bleed without creating a mess and in silence. He asserted that I didn't want to be a performer. However, behaving like the guitar years didn't give a damn before it arrived for him in any case. The opening of A Nightmare on Elm Street's Hey Door. However, 21 Jump Street was the one that kicked it open and almost closed. Johnny Depp, within a self-replicated, failed to recognize it. As Officer Tom Johnny Hansen became well-known. All night, teen magazines were all over his fist. The other bedroom. Shopping centers exploded in screams. Hollywood hailed him as the new next safe pick is a gorgeous boy. To that was a victory. World, however, to Johnny, it was a cage. He had the feeling of a product sold, packaged and promoted. Every line, every smile he posed for, he delivered chipped away at the person who was actually hiding below. It had been frank music. That was actual suffering. However, this was plastic was considered a novelty. He would later admit something that was fake. And consequently, as the world celebrated highs increased, Johnny Depp started making plans for his getaway. Not from notoriety, but rather from the self-image that celebrity had created. If Johnny was created by 21 Jump Street, it almost broke Depp, but it made him famous. Thus, instead of using words to protest, he was options. He ceased playing parts that made him appear good. Rather, he began selecting figures that resembled him within bruised, odd, misinterpreted. He performed in Misfits, Dreamers and Damaged Men, attempting to make it through in a universe that never allowed for him. Shock value wasn't the point. It was a matter of survival. Using Crybaby, he made fun of the Hollywood attempted to market that image. However, Edward Scissorhands was the one who made the alteration. Everything. A boy whose hands are blades, incapable of interacting with the world without causing or receiving pain. It wasn't simply performing, it was Johnny by way of Tim in his lens. Burton discovered a mirror. The language was eventually comprehended by someone. He had been attempting to communicate his entire life. Audiences also sensed it, for they looked past the face for the first time and into the spirit. What came next? Werewolves that didn't follow the guidelines. The Kin Clown in June, Benny and the Haunted, the Strange Wanderer in Dead Man Arose on a Dream is romantic, and the annoying idealist in Ed Wood. With every during the performance, Johnny removed Thepelish and Show Off Your Pain. By the beginning of 2002, Johnny Depp was no longer merely a performer. He was a mystery AA man who was a walking contradiction and never sought fame, but carried it like a curse. Next was the part that would Captain Jack distinguish a generation. Sparrow. However, what they overlook is he wasn't wanted by Disney. Executives startled upon seeing his initial performance, the muttered phrases, the unpredictable motions, the Keith Richards swagger. They didn't have it in mind. They believed he was destroying the movie. However, Depp was fully aware of what he was doing. He wasn't behaving pirate-like. He was merging into one. Jack Sparrow was neatly cut. He lacked nobility. He was Ames as a survivor, a cunning individual who possessed it seen too much and still managed to chuckle. Sound known. The world didn't appear out of nowhere in love with Jack. He reminded them of Johnny. The film defied expectations, making more than $650 million. Depp was rewarded his initial nomination for an Oscar, followed by a franchise worth billions of dollars. However, with each follow-up, each press tour, each payday, a silent fear began to seep in. He was no longer investigating characters. He was doing it again. Jack Sparrow possessed it was like a second skin, beginning to choke him. She claimed to be a survivor of mistreatment and thereby throw a long, devastating shadow. Johnny answered with a $50 million lawsuit for defamation. This wasn't only about getting his name cleared, it was centered on survival. Roles disappeared. Franchises pulled away. He was removed from Fantastic Beasts and Pirates of the Caribbean, shuttered its doors peacefully. Its doors to him. He didn't simply lose jobs. His legacy was lost. The legal case continued for years. Both sides displayed texts, recordings, and timeframes that are in conflict. It wasn't only a court case. It spread over the world. Obsession. Millions of people watched, not for justice but for show. Additionally, Johnny, regarded as inviolable, stood exposed in a courtroom, making his suffering visible to the world. When the jury's verdict that was ultimately in 2022, there seemed to be a public resurrection, a vindication moment. However, even as he stated, the jury awarded me, there was no celebration when I got my life back in his tone. Due to the fact that the lost years couldn't be recovered by a verdict, the emotional tranquility that was taken away to Briss, all it could provide was silence. Following the storm, as soon as the camera eye ceased to flicker, and the courthouse, Johnny Depp did not return toward carpets or movie sets. He came back to the beginning. Music, it wasn't about celebrity no longer. It had nothing to do with being observed. It has to do with recovery. In the midst of a media circus and private destruction, music was still the one, so he wasn't betrayed. In 2015, he was a founding member of the Hollywood Vampires, featuring rock icons Joe and Alice Cooper. However, following the trial, the band grew beyond a side project. It turned into a haven, a phase in which Head didn't need to give an explanation, where the chatter is the only thing louder than was his guitar's sound. He wasn't the disgraced actor, Johnny Depp. He was just Johnny, the Kentucky child whose pain was written into chords to survive. The illumination was milder, the cheers were purer, and during those times Anne began to return inside him, not every simultaneously but sufficiently to remind him that despite everything being lost, there is still a song to play. As his public perception collapsed, and Johnny Depp vanished into a world that few people could imagine, a lavish, fantastical empire designed for escape, not attention. He wasn't merely purchasing homes, he was constructing mental bunkers and sanctuaries. 37-acre French village that has been renovated, fourth family he had before, a total of 5 pen homes in Los Angeles, a large horse farm in Kentucky, private islands in the Bahamas, a 156-foot vessel called Thetos he cared about, Vanessa Vagaloya, Jack, Lily Rose, and Johnny. On that, from the outside, it appeared to be extravagant indulgence. However, to those who comprehended, it was something else. Command, a man who was losing everything was Depp, his dignity, his profession, and his marriage, and thus he constructed cloud-based castles to feel secure as the earth underneath him. Apart, his expenditures were astounding. $200,000 per month for wine, $30,000 per month for more than $300,000 per month on private planes, monthly on security and employees. It wasn't greed, it was sorrow cloaked in magnificence. When his case was filed in 2017, in opposition to his previous management firm, revealed the scope of it all. Fans were, however, hidden within the headlines was a man just attempting to cling to fragments of himself. Due to the fact that when the world sees, it's easy to forget that you are a myth. Myths can also bleed. The legal actions didn't only expose Johnny Depp's money, they revealed the vulnerability of a survival-based way of existence. The French, the village sold, the pen homes have vanished. Even Vaholi Roger, the beloved, is floating. He sold an homage to the family he lost. To J.K. Rowling. He wasn't simply letting things go. Of resources, he was relinquishing memories. Too bulky to transport. His empire, once worth more than $650 million, was in disarray, not because he quit his job, but as he had invested his wealth and feeling into sorrow, into flight, into attempting to replicate something that his Famouche had stolen a long time ago. People who were close to him started to observe the shift. He wasn't furious. He was worn out. His eyes had become a thin flicker. His once sharp voice had turned inward in rebellion. The lawsuits, the betrayals, the public, they didn't only cost him money to undress. Cash, they dispelled the legend, and the man was all that remained. Still breathing, but not in the manner he once did. Johnny Depp did not leave the house. He silently and gradually faded into a sort of self-selected exile. The party came to an end. The cameras stopped working. Curiosity, the world previously fixated on, went on, but amid that silence, something the sacred started to take shape. He wasn't attempting to go back to the past. He was attempting to determine what was important. The star had vanished. The myth was dispelled. And a man started rebuilding from the debris, his soul, not his career. They were no longer duties, the image, the need to be comprehensible to strangers. Instead of them, something more human, something more delicate. It took some time to arrive, and it wasn't free of charge. However, in allowing give up the delusion, Johnny discovered something that he had never really possessed before: his independence from decades of celebrity. Not to perform, not to win over others, but only to. Additionally, in that silent reckoning, hadn't merely make it through. He became softer, has slowed down. He started over, not using a script but in silence. Nowadays, flashing is distant from Johnny Depp's home. Crazy schedules and cameras. Nestled enters the French village. His world has become smaller in the rural. And infinitely more authentic. No merino red carpets, no chasing, no entourages roles, simply nature's silence, Thea's paintings, brushstrokes, and Thea guitar humming beneath his fingers. He occasionally visits England for music, a private performance, a piece. However, he consistently goes back to alone voluntarily, rather than in despair. He doesn't is no longer defined by the zeros on a salary following an anticipated $400 loss million. His present wealth ranges from $150,000 to $200 million is not considered a decline from elegance. It is a restoration to equilibrium. Haino carefully considers what is important, and on moments, music and art. His employees are retiny, his circle even more so. He's not eager to re-establish an empire. He's want to promote peace. Additionally, the two names are at the center of this new life. It stayed on his lips the entire time, even in his darkest times. Jack and Lily Rose. For all of Johnny Depp's characters, none of them meant more than the part they played. He didn't practice. Dad, turning into a dad not only transformed him, but it also Jack and Lily Rose walked inside his. They gave him something he had. Life. Never really understood as a child. Roots. A justification for being grounded, a guide to follow when everything else seemed to lacking direction. At one point, he said, My kids provided me with a solid basis, and that wasn't only a line. It was the reality. The reasoning behind each choice he made, even when the world was collapsing. Lily Rose, currently a rising star within her own field, continues to be his closest emotional mirror. Additionally, Jack, who leads a very secluded life in theft protection, Johnny battled valiantly to maintain, even while the cases are going on. The controversies, the breakdown in his... He never openly reacted angrily, because they are afraid of the consequences. Hadn't lived for himself alone, he endured for them. Due to the fact that in there he didn't have to be a mythized, he simply had to be a father. Once, Johnny Depp, a badge of his heart, out loud, passionate, and frequently careless. His name inscribed on the flesh of passion, Winona forever. Vanessa Kate Mosparatus, heard of Amber. Every chapter is louder compared to the previous one. However, there aren't any extravagant displays, no yelling headlines, no fast-paced romances. Following Thuricage, Johnny has choose to be alone, not out of resentment, but rather because of clarity, a subtle connections, whispers Joe Rich arrived, with his previous lawyer and left hardly a trace behind, and that says it all. He's not longer seeking someone's approval someone else's arms, no longer looking for a partner to cover a gap. He alone is able to... This man has shown a lot of love, lost a lot, and ultimately came to terms with it. You can't find peace in other people. It can be discovered by learning how to stand, feel whole even while you're alone. Even though Johnny Depp stepped back from the limelight, health-related worries started to surface as he appeared slower, thinner, and exhausted. Whispers were heard. Was he alright? At last, when the years caught up, afoot he had to cancel events due to an injury. Admirers concerned. The world once more observed, not with silent fear, yet with judgment, due to the fact that, for the first time, the majority of devoted followers saw a man no longer concealing the burden he bore. However, then the can arrived. Johnny entered their silver hair on a red carpet, a dignified bird and eyes that were obviously exively and still glistened with life. He was not coming back as a celebrity. Hugh was coming back as a survivor. In Jean he played a haunted soul Dubarry floating. In sorrow, it wasn't merely a function, an echo was heard. The show felt inhabited rather than acted.